The prosecutor's voice cut through the tension like a knife as she paused the footage at the exact moment Rex broke free, her words echoing off the marble walls of the ancient courthouse. "This was no accident, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she declared as she walked closer to the screen, her finger pointing at the subtle movement of Officer Sullivan's left hand just microseconds before the attack. The evidence would show that Officer Sullivan had received specialized training in K-9 handling at the prestigious Blue Line Academy. His certification papers, displayed on the overhead projector, showed perfect scores in dog control and threat assessment, making the events of that fateful night even more suspicious. General Thompson had been driving her newly purchased Tesla Model S, the kind of car that usually warranted respectful treatment in this upscale neighborhood, yet dash cam footage from 3 separate patrol cars showed Sullivan immediately radioing for K-9 backup before even approaching her vehicle. Assistant District Attorney Rachel Martinez clicked to the next slide, revealing General Thompson's military ID photo, taken just 2 days before the incident, her face radiant with pride after receiving her second star, the youngest black female officer to achieve such a rank in Army history. The jurors leaned forward in their seats as Martinez methodically laid out the timeline showing how Officer Sullivan had run her plates, discovered her military status, yet proceeded to approach with Rex in an aggressive stance. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as enhanced audio revealed General Thompson calmly identifying herself. "My name is General Maria Thompson, United States Army. I have my military ID right here on the dashboard," her voice steady, professional, everything taught in military protocol for traffic stops. But Officer Sullivan's response, captured on his body cam, showed no acknowledgement of her rank or status. Instead, he kept Rex's position at what K-9 experts would later testify was an attack-ready stance. FBI Special Agent Marcus Thompson, sitting in the front row behind the prosecution, gripped his badge so hard his knuckles turned white as the footage continued playing. Frame by frame, his years of training in maintaining composure during high-stress situations tested beyond measure. As he watched his daughter's final conscious moments, the proud father, who had attended every promotion ceremony, every award presentation, now forced to witness the devastating consequences of what the prosecution alleged was a deliberate act of negligence. Security camera footage from a nearby convenience store provided a different angle, showing Officer Sullivan adjusting Rex's specialized control harness moments before initiating the traffic stop, the prosecution highlighting how this adjustment matched patterns documented in 3 previous incidents involving minority drivers in the past year. Though none had resulted in fatalities, the similarity in technique could not be ignored. Expert witnesses would later testify that these specific adjustments served no legitimate law enforcement purpose. As the video approached the critical moment, Judge Elena Richardson noticed several jurors averting their eyes, knowing what was coming next, but the prosecution insisted on playing the full sequence, arguing that every second leading up to the attack demonstrated Officer Sullivan's state of mind. His body cam footage showed him repeatedly repositioning himself, while General Thompson remained perfectly still, her decades of military training evident in her disciplined stance, hands visible, empty palms facing forward, just as she had trained countless young officers to do during her distinguished career. Officer Sullivan watched from the defense table, his face a mask of practiced neutrality, but his right hand trembling slightly as the footage captured his delayed reaction to Rex's initial lunge. The prosecution had timed it precisely 2.7 seconds between the dog breaking free and any verbal command to stop, during which time General Thompson maintained her position exactly as protocol demanded, the ultimate irony of her perfect compliance becoming a factor in the tragedy. The background chatter of the dispatch radio provided an eerie soundtrack to the unfolding disaster. Calls about a suspicious vehicle in an upscale neighborhood. Despite General Thompson's car being registered to her base address for over 3 years, the prejudicial nature of the initial call would become a crucial point of contention as the trial progressed, revealing deeper systemic issues within the department that the prosecution planned to expose through witness testimony and internal communications. Shocked murmurs filled the courtroom as the final frames played out, showing Rex landing on General Thompson's chest, her medals glinting under the streetlights as she fell, the prosecution freezing the image on her face, a mixture of surprise and something else that her father would later describe as devastating recognition, the look of someone who, despite doing everything right, still ended up a victim of the very system she had sworn to protect and serve. Special Agent Marcus Thompson felt the weight of 28 years of FBI service press down on his shoulders as he watched the medical examiner approach the witness stand. Agen carried herself with professional detachment, but her voice softened imperceptibly as she began describing the injuries his daughter had sustained that night. The agent in him appreciated her precision, while the father in him fought the urge to leave the courtroom. His wife Elena, a retired judge, squeezed his hand as photograph after photograph appeared on screen showing the progression of the K-9 attack, the prosecution methodically establishing through expert testimony how Officer Sullivan had adequate time to recall Rex during multiple points of the encounter. Agent Thompson found himself mentally counting the seconds, just as he had taught Maria to do during their weekend tactical training sessions when she was a teenager dreaming of following his footsteps into federal service. The courtroom fell silent as Agent Thompson pulled out his daughter's FBI Academy application essay, which she had written at age 17. The prosecution had fought hard to include it as evidence of her lifelong commitment to law enforcement. Special Agent Thompson read aloud, his voice steady as he shared Maria's words about wanting to bridge the gap between military and civilian law enforcement. The essay that had earned her a personal recommendation from the FBI director now served as testament to the cruel irony of her death. New evidence emerged as the prosecution presented Agent Thompson's own investigation findings conducted during his leave of absence, his FBI training evident in the meticulous documentation of Officer Sullivan's social media history, revealing concerning patterns of behavior. The defense objected vigorously, but Judge Richardson allowed the evidence, citing Agent Thompson's unique qualification to gather such intelligence, his daughter's death having prompted an unprecedented cooperation between FBI and internal affairs. Elena Thompson watched her husband maintain his composure as text messages between K-9 unit officers were displayed showing jokes about unleashing their dogs in certain neighborhoods, the timestamps matching perfectly with Maria's final patrol route. Agent Thompson had discovered these messages buried deep in department servers, his cybercrimes expertise allowing him to recover deleted conversations that painted a disturbing picture of systemic issues within the K-9 unit. The prosecution called forward Lieutenant James Martinez from Internal Affairs, who confirmed that Agent Thompson's findings had sparked a broader investigation into K-9 training practices across the state. Photographs showed Officer Sullivan attending unofficial training sessions where dogs were allegedly conditioned to respond more aggressively to specific targets, the evidence trail leading back to a dismissed trainer with known ties to extremist groups. Agent Thompson's jaw tightened as security footage from the police station immediately following the incident played, showing Officer Sullivan laughing with fellow officers, while paramedics were still working on Maria at the scene. The timestamp burned into the corner of the screen, revealing crucial minutes lost before medical assistance was called, the same minutes that emergency room doctors would later testify might have made the difference. Memories flooded back as Agent Thompson recalled teaching Maria defensive tactics in their backyard, her determined expression as she practiced FBI takedown techniques, her smile when she announced she was joining the Army instead wanting to serve before pursuing law enforcement, the pride in her voice when she called to share news of each promotion, leading to her historic achievement as the youngest black female general, the same achievements as should have guaranteed her respect during a routine traffic stop. The prosecution presented Agent Thompson's analysis of Officer Sullivan's dash cam footage showing how the officer had run Maria's plates, learning her military status, rank, and connection to the FBI, yet chose to approach with an aggressive K-9 stance. Agent Thompson's expertise in behavioral analysis allowed him to identify 7 distinct moments where standard protocol was ignored, his testimony carrying the weight of both professional assessment and personal anguish. As the day's evidence drew to a close, Agent Thompson pulled out one final piece of evidence: Maria's phone recovered from the scene, its screen still displaying an unread text message to her father asking if he was still coming to her military strategy presentation. The following morning, the message she had sent just minutes before Officer Sullivan's lights appeared in her rearview mirror, the presentation she would never give, the reforms she had planned to propose for military police cooperation, now transformed into recommendations for the investigation into her own death. The weight of the FBI badge in Agent Thompson's pocket seemed heavier than ever as he contemplated how his decades of solving complex cases had led him to the most important investigation of his life. Sitting in that courtroom, his training forcing him to analyze every detail, while his heart ached for justice, the kind of justice he had always believed in, the kind Maria had died still believing in despite everything. Defense attorney Sarah Mitchell felt sweat trickle down her spine as she approached the podium, her carefully planned strategy crumbling as the prosecution produced another set of damning text messages. Her client, Officer Sullivan, sat rigidly in his chair as screenshots from a private K-9 unit group chat filled the massive courtroom display screen. Messages that should have been deleted months ago, now threatening to destroy her entire defense. Reaching into her Chanel briefcase, Mitchell pulled out Officer Sullivan's commendations and service records, a stack of papers that had seemed impressive during trial prep, but now felt flimsy in the face of mounting evidence. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she called forward Dr. Michael Reynolds, a renowned K-9 training expert who had reviewed Rex's service history. The dog had passed every certification with flying colors until that fatal night when everything went wrong. The defense expert struggled to explain the apparent contradictions in Officer Sullivan's training logs showing perfect scores in handler control, while security footage from previous traffic stops revealed a pattern of using Rex to intimidate suspects. Mitchell watched the jury's expressions shift as Dar Reynolds attempted to justify the discrepancies, his credibility weakening with each question from the ruthless prosecution team who had clearly anticipated every argument. Mitchell adjusted her strategy mid-presentation, calling forward Officer Sullivan's former partner, Detective Sandra Martinez, who testified about his exemplary conduct during their 3 years working together in the Drug Enforcement Unit. But the prosecution was ready with body camera footage showing Sullivan making questionable comments during arrests, the timestamps corresponding perfectly with internal affairs complaints that had mysteriously disappeared from his file. A murmur rippled through the courtroom as Mitchell introduced evidence of Rex's recent medical examination, suggesting the dog had been showing signs of aggressive behavior weeks before the incident. The prosecution countered with veterinary records showing Officer Sullivan had declined recommended behavioral assessments. The defense attorney felt her case slipping away as the prosecution connected each missed warning sign to departmental policies that had been systematically ignored. Desperation crept into Mitchell's voice as she presented character witnesses from the community speaking to Officer Sullivan's volunteer work with youth programs, but their testimony rang hollow against the backdrop of cell phone videos showing his interactions with minority residents in the weeks leading up to General Thompson's death, the contrast between his public image and private conduct becoming increasingly difficult to reconcile. The afternoon took an unexpected turn when Mitchell called forward K-9 Unit Supervisor Captain Thomas Anderson, hoping to establish proper procedural adherence, but Anderson cracked under cross-examination, revealing unauthorized training sessions that had occurred off the books, his testimony opening a Pandora's box of departmental secrets that Mitchell had specifically advised her client to avoid mentioning, the prosecutor's eyes lighting up with each new revelation. Mitchell watched helplessly as her carefully constructed timeline of events fell apart beneath the weight of surveillance footage from nearby businesses showing Officer Sullivan arriving at the scene minutes before his official call for backup, suggesting premeditation, rather than the spontaneous encounter they had claimed in their initial defense strategy. The jury scribbling notes furiously as each piece of evidence further eroded their position. Attempting to salvage what remained of their case, Mitchell redirected focus to Rex's previous successful apprehensions, presenting statistics about the K-9 unit's impact on crime reduction, but Agent Thompson's presence in the courtroom seemed to magnify the hollow ring of these achievements, his daughter's death casting a shadow over every supposed success. The defense tried to highlight the cost of those statistics written clearly in the grieving father's eyes. Officer Sullivan shifted uncomfortably as Mitchell presented evidence of his PTSD diagnosis from a workplace shooting 3 years prior, attempting to explain his heightened threat perception, but the prosecution skillfully demonstrated how he had been cleared for full duty, including K-9 handling, despite recommendations for desk assignment. The paper trail of overlooked psychological evaluations and ignored medical advice damaging their defense further. In a last-ditch effort, Mitchell introduced expert testimony about the reliability of police dogs in high-stress situations, but her witness faltered when confronted with studies showing racial bias in K-9 deployment statistics, the very research General Thompson had cited in her military police reform proposals now being used to demonstrate the systemic issues that contributed to her death. The irony of this connection lost on no one in the courtroom. As the day drew to a close, Mitchell gathered her scattered documents, knowing tomorrow would bring even more damaging evidence. Her legal pad, filled with crossed-out strategies and abandoned arguments, the weight of defending what increasingly appeared indefensible pressing down on her shoulders, while Officer Sullivan stared blankly ahead, his career and freedom slipping away with each passing hour in a case that was rapidly becoming a referendum on much more than one tragic night. Dr. James Chen adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses as he walked the jury through the enhanced surveillance footage, his laser pointer dancing across the screen, highlighting subtle movements that untrained eyes might miss. 25 years of military K-9 training experience evident in every precise observation. The Harvard professor had analyzed thousands of police dog incidents, but none had disturbed him quite like this one. Frame by frame, Dr. Chen demonstrated how Officer Sullivan had systematically positioned Rex for maximum aggression, his movements matching patterns documented in controversial training techniques that had been banned in several states. The expert witness pulled up side-by-side comparisons showing similar stance adjustments from previous incidents where Rex had been deployed against minority suspects, the statistical improbability of such consistency gaining in its precision. The courtroom watched transfixed as Dr. Chen played footage from Rex's initial training sessions 3 years earlier, showing a completely different handling style. The transformation in technique coinciding with Officer Sullivan's attendance at unofficial training seminars, led by former handlers with documented histories of excessive force. The prosecution produced attendance records showing Sullivan had participated in 17 such sessions, all conveniently missing from official department logs. Dr. Chen presented his analysis of the specialized K-9 harness Officer Sullivan had been using that night, comparing it to standard issue equipment, his findings revealing unauthorized modifications that gave the handler more subtle control over the dog's aggressive responses. The defense team objected vigorously, but fell silent as Chen demonstrated the modifications on a replica harness, showing how slight pressure changes could trigger an attack while appearing completely normal on camera. Pulling up thermal imaging from a nearby security camera, Dr. Chen showed the jury how Rex's body temperature and stance had changed minutes before the attack, indicating premeditation rather than spontaneous response. The expert witness explained how police dogs are trained to recognize subtle handler cues, his analysis suggesting Officer Sullivan had deliberately agitated Rex while appearing to maintain control, the evidence undermining the defense's claim of equipment malfunction. Agent Thompson leaned forward intently as Dr. Chen shared findings from his review of the K-9 unit's training records, discovering patterns of systematic desensitization to normal compliance behaviors, the kind of protocol violations that General Thompson herself had been investigating as part of her military police reform initiative. The expert witness revealing how standard K-9 certification tests had been modified to hide these dangerous training practices. The prosecution displayed Dr. Chen's frame-by-frame breakdown of the 7 critical moments when Officer Sullivan could have prevented the attack, each instance highlighted with supporting documentation from international K-9 handling standards. The expert witness demonstrated using a 3D simulation how proper procedure would have easily restrained Rex, even after the initial lunge, his testimony systematically destroying the defense's claim of handler helplessness. Hushed whispers filled the courtroom as Dr. Chen presented data from Rex's embedded tracking chip showing elevated aggression patterns in specific neighborhoods, the dates correlating perfectly with civilian complaints that had previously been dismissed. The expert witness explained how these statistics revealed a clear pattern of weaponizing police dogs in certain communities, the kind of data that General Thompson had been collecting for her proposed reforms. Dr. Chen's voice carried authority as he explained how Officer Sullivan's body camera footage revealed intentional blind spots during the incident, angles that conveniently obscured key moments while appearing to maintain transparency. The expert witness demonstrated how this technique had been taught in those unauthorized training sessions, showing similar camera positioning across multiple incidents in Officer Sullivan's record. The jury appeared stunned as Dr. Chen presented his analysis of Rex's autopsy, revealing evidence of systematic aggression training that violated federal K-9 handling guidelines, the dog's brain chemistry showing signs of controlled stress conditioning, the kind of modification that transformed highly trained police dogs into weapons. The expert witness explaining how these changes could only result from deliberate handler intervention over an extended period. Pulling up acoustic analysis of the incident, Dr. Chen demonstrated how Officer Sullivan's verbal commands to Rex contained subtle tonal variations known to enhance aggressive response in trained police dogs, the kind of sophisticated manipulation that required extensive knowledge of K-9 psychology, the evidence suggesting a level of premeditation that contradicted every statement Officer Sullivan had made about that night. As his testimony drew to a close, Agen presented his final analysis, a comprehensive timeline combining all elements of the incident, showing how each decision, each movement, each command had led to the inevitable tragedy. His expert conclusion leaving no doubt that Officer Sullivan's actions reflected not just negligence but deliberate manipulation of his K-9 partner, the scientific evidence providing irrefutable support for the prosecution's case, while General Thompson's father watched justice unfold through the lens of expert testimony. The military honor guard stood at attention as Colonel Sarah Rodriguez took the stand, her dress uniform adorned with combat medals that seemed to catch every ray of light in the somber courtroom. She had served alongside General Thompson during 3 combat tours, their last mission together just 2 weeks before the incident. Footage from their final operation in Syria played on the screen, showing Thompson coordinating a daring rescue of civilian refugees under heavy fire. Tears glistened in Colonel Rodriguez's eyes as she recounted how General Thompson had personally carried 2 injured children to safety during that evacuation, her leadership inspiring the entire unit to push beyond their limits. The prosecution presented photographs of Thompson working with local communities, building schools in war-torn regions, establishing medical clinics in areas other officers deemed too dangerous. Her humanitarian work earning her unprecedented respect from both military and civilian populations. Agent Thompson clutched his wife's hand as classified mission reports were unsealed, revealing how his daughter had revolutionized military police training protocols, her innovative approach to community engagement becoming a model for joint operations between military and civilian law enforcement, the same protocols she had been scheduled to present at the Pentagon the morning after that fatal traffic stop. Her briefing notes still sitting unopened on a general's desk. The courtroom fell silent as bodycam footage played from Thompson's last training session with junior officers, her voice clear and commanding as she taught de-escalation techniques, her emphasis on treating every civilian with dignity and respect regardless of circumstances, the irony of her words echoing through the courtroom as security footage showed Officer Sullivan ignoring these very principles during their fatal encounter. Colonel Rodriguez shared personal footage from their last base ceremony where Thompson had received her 2nd star, the youngest black female general to achieve this rank in Army history, the video showing her passionate speech about bridging gaps between military and civilian communities, her words now serving as a haunting prophecy of the systemic issues that would lead to her death. Agent Thompson watching the screen with fierce pride mixed with devastating loss. Evidence mounted as the prosecution presented Thompson's research into police militarization, her proposals for reform, focusing specifically on K-9 unit protocols and racial bias in law enforcement, her work revealing patterns that precisely matched the circumstances of her own death, her colleagues' testimony painting a picture of an officer dedicated to creating positive change in a system that ultimately failed her. The military honor guard shifted slightly as satellite footage played, showing Thompson coordinating humanitarian airdrops in conflict zones, her tactical brilliance saving countless lives while maintaining perfect operational security, her ability to balance military efficiency with human compassion earning her recommendations for future Joint Chiefs consideration, her potential cut short by 7 minutes of catastrophic prejudice on a suburban street. Agent Thompson listened as Thompson's commanding officer General James Marshall described her impact on modern military doctrine, her innovative strategies for community-based peacekeeping operations now being implemented across multiple combat zones, her methods proving especially effective in reducing civilian casualties while maintaining operational effectiveness, her legacy already inspiring a new generation of officers committed to her vision of progressive military leadership. Photographs from Thompson's last humanitarian mission filled the screen, showing her working alongside local leaders in Afghanistan, her diplomatic skills bridging cultural divides, her approach to cultural sensitivity becoming required reading at West Point, the prosecution drawing sharp contrast between her lifetime of service and the 7 minutes of bias that ended it all, her father watching as her achievements underscored the magnitude of their loss. Colonel Rodriguez concluded her testimony by sharing the contents of Thompson's last email to her unit sent just hours before her death, outlining her vision for a reformed military police program emphasizing accountability, transparency, and community engagement, the very principles that would now fuel the investigation into her death, her words serving as both testimony and testament to the changes she had fought to implement. The prosecution presented security footage from the military base showing Thompson leaving her last strategy, meeting her car pulling away from the gates for the final time, her colleagues saluting unaware it would be their last goodbye, her father watching the familiar routine of her departure, now transformed into evidence in a trial he never imagined would define her legacy. As the day's testimony drew to a close, Agent Thompson stood at attention alongside the honor guard as they play footage from Thompson's last public speech, her words about justice, equality, and the responsibility of law enforcement to protect all citizens equally resonating through the courtroom. Her vision for reformed police practices, now more relevant than ever, her death transforming her from military pioneer to catalyst for change in ways none could have predicted. Her legacy ensuring that her final traffic stop would become a turning point in American law enforcement history. Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez from Internal Affairs commanded attention as she approached the evidence table, her 20 years of investigating police misconduct evident in her methodical presentation of Officer Sullivan's digital footprint, recovered text messages, emails, and social media posts, revealing a disturbing pattern of behavior that had gone unchecked for years despite multiple civilian complaints. Her investigation uncovering a network of officers who systematically protected each other from scrutiny. The courtroom grew tense as Rodriguez displayed a series of deleted group chats between K-9 unit officers, their casual jokes about unleashing dogs in certain neighborhoods interspersed with coded language that Internal Affairs had decoded using FBI resources, the timestamps matching perfectly with reported incidents of excessive force. Agent Thompson leaning forward as the evidence revealed how his daughter's death connected to a larger pattern of departmental misconduct. Rodriguez presented a comprehensive timeline of Officer Sullivan's K-9 deployments over the past 5 years, heat maps showing disproportionate use of force in minority neighborhoods, statistical analysis revealing patterns that could not be explained by crime rates or call volumes, the data painting a picture of systematic targeting that had been buried beneath layers of bureaucratic paperwork and falsified reports. Her investigation exposing how internal review processes had been deliberately circumvented. Surveillance footage from the police station played showing Officer Sullivan and fellow K-9 handlers conducting unauthorized training sessions in the department's backlot, their methods explicitly violating federal guidelines. Rodriguez explained how these sessions had been disguised as routine maintenance in official logs, the deception extending through multiple levels of department supervision. Her investigation revealing how whistleblowers had been silenced through intimidation and selective enforcement. The prosecution displayed internal emails showing how complaints about Officer Sullivan had been routinely downgraded or disappeared entirely. Rodriguez's testimony revealing a sophisticated system of cover-ups involving multiple ranking officers. Her investigation uncovering how body camera footage from controversial incidents had been altered or deleted, the technical analysis proving deliberate manipulation rather than equipment malfunction. Lieutenant Rodriguez methodically presented evidence of Officer Sullivan's social media activity under various pseudonyms, his online interactions revealing connections to extremist groups that advocated for aggressive police tactics, especially involving K-9 units, the investigation showing how these influences had shaped his approach to law enforcement, his digital fingerprints leading to encrypted forums where officers shared techniques for avoiding accountability. The jury watched intently as Rodriguez played footage from previous traffic stops, showing Officer Sullivan following similar patterns of escalation, the incidents building a clear timeline of increasing aggression. Her investigation revealing how each complaint had been handled internally without proper documentation, the system of informal discipline allowing dangerous behaviors to continue unchecked until they culminated in General Thompson's death. Internal Affairs records show how Officer Sullivan had been quietly transferred between precincts after controversial incidents, Rodriguez explaining how this pattern of movement had helped conceal the extent of his misconduct. Her investigation revealing similar transfers among other officers with excessive force complaints, the department effectively shuffling problems between districts rather than addressing them. Rodriguez presented analysis of department training records showing how official K-9 handling protocols had been gradually modified to allow more aggressive tactics. Her investigation uncovering unauthorized changes to certification requirements that emphasized submission over safety, the evolution of these changes corresponding with increases in civilian complaints about police dog incidents across multiple jurisdictions. Evidence mounted as Rodriguez shared findings from her audit of K-9 unit body camera compliance showing systematic patterns of cameras being disabled during controversial encounters. Her investigation revealing how official equipment malfunction reports had been used to cover deliberate deactivation, the technical analysis proving that Officer Sullivan's camera had been manually turned off multiple times during crucial moments. The courtroom fell silent as Rodriguez presented her analysis of department communication patterns during and immediately after General Thompson's death, showing how quickly informal networks had activated to control the narrative. Her investigation, revealing text messages between officers coordinating their stories before giving official statements. The cover-up beginning even as paramedics worked desperately to save their victim's life. Lieutenant Rodriguez concluded her testimony by presenting a comprehensive report showing how each piece of evidence connected to broader systemic issues within the department. Her investigation, revealing how Officer Sullivan's actions that might reflected not just individual bias but institutional failure. The prosecution using her findings to demonstrate how General Thompson's death resulted from a culture of impunity that had developed over years of inadequate oversight and deliberate obstruction. Agent Thompson watched as Rodriguez's final presentation showed how his daughter's military research into police reform had unknowingly identified many of the same issues that contributed to her death. Her work, now serving as both evidence and indictment of a system that had failed to protect one of its most dedicated advocates. The investigation ensuring that her death would force the very changes she had fought to implement throughout her distinguished career. Digital forensics expert Dr. Sarah Chen approached the evidence table, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as she pulled up enhanced versions of General Thompson's dash cam footage, the sophisticated AI-powered audio enhancement revealing layers of sound that had been previously inaudible. The prosecution presenting this new technology as a way to understand the critical moments before the attack with unprecedented clarity. The courtroom speakers captured every nuance as General Thompson's voice came through crystal clear, her military training evident in her calm professional tone as she identified herself. The enhanced audio revealing subtle changes in Officer Sullivan's breathing patterns when he learned her identity. The prosecution arguing that these physiological responses indicated a moment of deliberate choice rather than spontaneous reaction. Dr. Chen synchronized footage from 5 different cameras, creating a comprehensive timeline of the incident. The combined angles showing Officer Sullivan receiving information about Thompson's identity, rank, and FBI connection through his patrol car computer several minutes before initiating contact. The evidence contradicting his earlier testimony about being unaware of her status until after the attack began. Thermal imaging from a nearby security camera revealed Officer Sullivan's elevated heart rate and body temperature as he approached Thompson's vehicle, the biometric data suggesting heightened arousal inconsistent with a routine traffic stop. Dr. Chen explained how these physiological indicators matched patterns associated with premeditated aggression rather than the defensive response claimed by the defense. Advanced audio processing isolated Officer Sullivan's commands to Rex, revealing subtle variations in tone and pitch that K-9 training experts had identified as aggressive cueing. The prosecution presenting spectrographic analysis showing how these verbal signals differed from standard police dog commands. The evidence suggesting deliberate manipulation of the trained animal responses. General Thompson's final phone call played through the courtroom speakers, her conversation with her father about the next morning's presentation ending abruptly as police lights appeared in her mirror, the casual optimism in her voice about upcoming police reforms standing in stark contrast to the tragedy about to unfold. Agent Thompson gripping his chair as he heard his daughter's last peaceful moments. Dr. Chen presented a virtual reconstruction of the scene using data from multiple surveillance sources, the 3D model showing precise movements of all parties involved. The technology revealing how Officer Sullivan had systematically positioned himself to give Rex the optimal attack angle while maintaining plausible deniability about his intentions. Enhanced body camera footage showed General Thompson following every procedure perfectly, her decades of military training evident in her precise movements, her hands visible empty palms forward just as she had trained countless others to do. The prosecution emphasizing how her perfect compliance had made her more vulnerable to the impending attack. The synchronized footage revealed a 17-second delay between Officer Sullivan recognizing Thompson's military status and his first approach to her vehicle, the prosecution arguing that this gap represented crucial moments of decision-making where alternative non-aggressive approaches could have been chosen. The evidence suggesting deliberate escalation rather than procedural necessity. Dr. Chen isolated audio from Rex's specialized collar microphone, the recording showing how the dog's breathing and vocalization patterns had changed in response to subtle handler cues. The evidence revealing a series of trained responses that contradicted Officer Sullivan's claim of unexpected aggression. Security footage from multiple angles showed General Thompson maintaining absolute stillness even as Rex began his approach, her military bearing holding firm as Officer Sullivan shifted his stance. The prosecution highlighting how her disciplined response aligned perfectly with official protocol while making her more vulnerable to the impending attack. The reconstruction demonstrated how Officer Sullivan had created artificial blind spots in his body camera coverage, the analysis revealing deliberate movements that kept key actions just out of frame while appearing to maintain proper documentation, the prosecution arguing that this pattern of selective recording indicated premeditation. Dr. Chen's final presentation combined all available data sources into a comprehensive timeline showing each decision point, each missed opportunity for de-escalation, each moment where different choices could have prevented tragedy, the evidence painting a devastating picture of deliberate choices leading to an inevitable conclusion. Agent Thompson watched as the final moments played out across multiple screens, his daughter's perfect posture maintained until the very end, her faith in protocol and procedure evident in her last conscious actions, the enhanced footage ensuring that every detail of those critical moments would be preserved as evidence of both tragedy and triumph of spirit. The prosecution concluded this phase of evidence by playing General Thompson's last words captured with perfect clarity by her car's premium sound system, her voice steady, professional, and dignified until the very end, her final statement of identity and rank serving as both testimony and accusation against a system that had failed to honor either. FBI Special Agent Marcus Thompson removed his badge, placing it on the witness stand, its golden surface catching the light as he began his testimony, decades of investigative experience merging with fatherly anguish as he shared findings from his personal investigation into his daughter's death, his methodical analysis revealing layers of corruption that standard police reviews had missed or deliberately overlooked. Pulling up encrypted communications he had recovered from Officer Sullivan's personal devices, Thompson demonstrated how the K-9 unit had developed sophisticated methods for targeting specific demographics while maintaining plausible deniability, his FBI cyberforensics training allowing him to decode messages that department investigators had dismissed as irrelevant, the evidence revealing coordinated efforts to abuse police dog deployments. Agent Thompson presented location data from Officer Sullivan's patrol car GPS spanning the past 3 years, the pattern analysis showing systematic deviations from assigned routes to target specific neighborhoods, the data correlating perfectly with civilian complaints that had been buried in administrative limbo, his investigation uncovering how official patrol logs had been falsified to hide these unauthorized detours. The courtroom watched in silence as Thompson played footage from his daughter's military body camera showing her leading peacekeeping operations in war zones, her approach to civilian interaction standing in stark contrast to the treatment she received that night, his voice steady as he explained how her own research into police reform had inadvertently documented the very practices that would lead to her death. Thompson revealed findings from his audit of K-9 unit training records, discovering unauthorized sessions conducted by handlers with connections to extremist groups, his investigation tracking financial transactions that linked these training programs to organizations promoting aggressive police tactics, the evidence showing how these influences had shaped department practices while avoiding official oversight. Using his FBI connections, Thompson had obtained satellite imagery showing Officer Sullivan's vehicle parked outside unauthorized K-9 training facilities on multiple occasions, the high-resolution photos revealing patterns of behavior that department supervisors had failed to notice or chosen to ignore, his investigation proving how official oversight had been systematically circumvented. Agent Thompson presented analysis of cell phone tower data showing communications between K-9 unit officers immediately after his daughter's death, the pattern revealing how quickly they had mobilized to control the narrative, his FBI experience allowing him to reconstruct deleted messages that showed coordinated efforts to obscure crucial details about the incident. The jury leaned forward as Thompson shared findings from his review of department body camera protocols, discovering systematic manipulation of footage during K-9 deployments, his investigation revealing how official equipment maintenance logs had been used to cover deliberate tampering, the evidence showing a pattern of selective documentation that had hidden years of misconduct. Thompson played enhanced audio from his daughter's final moments, his FBI training in sound analysis, revealing subtle details that local investigators had missed, the evidence showing how Officer Sullivan had escalated the situation through deliberate verbal cues, his investigation proving how standard de-escalation protocols had been intentionally ignored. Using advanced facial recognition technology, Thompson demonstrated how Officer Sullivan's expression and body language matched patterns associated with premeditated aggression. His FBI behavioral analysis training allowing him to identify subtle indicators that department reviews had overlooked, the evidence suggesting deliberate intent rather than reactive response. Agent Thompson presented findings from his investigation into department disciplinary procedures, discovering how complaints about K-9 units had been systematically downgraded or disappeared. His analysis revealing a pattern of protection that had allowed dangerous officers to remain on duty, the evidence showing how official oversight had failed at multiple levels. The courtroom fell silent as Thompson shared personal photographs of his daughter growing up, her childhood dream of serving justice evident in every image, his voice breaking slightly as he described teaching her the FBI oath of office, the same principles of justice she had carried into her military career and ultimately to her final moments. Thompson concluded his testimony by presenting a comprehensive timeline connecting every piece of evidence he had uncovered, his FBI training transforming grief into methodical investigation, the evidence revealing how systemic failures, personal bias, and deliberate misconduct had combined to create the circumstances that ended his daughter's life. Agent Thompson maintained his professional composure as he detailed how his daughter's military research into police reform had paralleled his own FBI investigations into department misconduct, their separate work unknowingly documenting the same patterns of abuse that would ultimately lead to their tragic intersection on that fatal night. Alena Thompson watched her husband testify her years as a judge, allowing her to appreciate the devastating precision of his investigation, his grief channeled into exposing truth, his FBI badge representing both the justice system that had failed their daughter and the tools he now used to ensure her death would force needed change. Thunder rolled outside the courthouse windows as the jury forewoman rose, her hands trembling slightly as she held the verdict form. 3 days of deliberation had left dark circles under the jurors' eyes, their faces bearing the weight of the decision that would reshape police accountability across the nation. Agent Thompson sat perfectly still, his FBI training barely containing the storm of emotions as he waited to hear justice for his daughter. Officer Sullivan stared straight ahead, his face ashen as the forewoman read out guilty on all counts, the charges ranging from negligent homicide to civil rights violations to obstruction of justice, the lengthy list of convictions reflecting both individual actions and systematic failures, each guilty verdict echoing through the courtroom like a hammer striking an anvil of truth. Judge Richardson adjusted her glasses as she prepared to deliver the sentence, her voice carrying decades of judicial experience as she addressed the broader implications of the case, her words weaving together the personal tragedy of General Thompson's death with the larger narrative of police reform, her sentence designed to serve both justice and systemic change. The prosecution team presented their final evidence showing how General Thompson's military research into police reform had predicted and documented the very issues that led to her death, her work now forming the foundation of sweeping changes in law enforcement training, her legacy reaching far beyond the military sphere she had served so brilliantly. Agent Thompson stood as the judge announced the formation of the Maria Thompson Commission for Police Accountability, his daughter's name now attached to mandatory reforms in K-9 unit training, psychological screening for handlers, and comprehensive oversight of police dog deployments, the changes she had fought for in life becoming her lasting legacy in death. Alena Thompson clutched her husband's hand as the judge detailed how evidence from the trial would be used to create new training protocols for law enforcement agencies nationwide, the comprehensive reforms addressing everything from implicit bias to handler psychology to community engagement, the systemic changes reflecting the intersection of military precision and civilian oversight that had defined their daughter's career. The Military Honor Guard stood at attention as Judge Richardson announced the establishment of the General Thompson Act, requiring body cameras with tamper-proof technology, enhanced civilian oversight of K-9 units, and mandatory reporting of all police dog deployments, the legislation ensuring that no other officer would face the same tragic fate while following protocol. Officer Sullivan's fellow K-9 handlers watched from the gallery as the judge ordered immediate suspension of unauthorized training programs nationwide, her ruling requiring comprehensive review of all police dog protocols, the reforms extending far beyond the original case to address systemic issues throughout law enforcement. Agent Thompson listened as the judge detailed how his FBI investigation techniques would become standard procedure for reviewing K-9 incidents, his methodical approach to uncovering department misconduct now serving as a template for future investigations, the integration of federal and local oversight preventing similar tragedies. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Richardson announced the creation of the Thompson Initiative for Police Reform, a joint program between military and civilian law enforcement agencies implementing the changes General Thompson had proposed in her final presentation, the collaboration ensuring that her vision for improved police-community relations would become reality. Alana Thompson wiped away tears as the judge described how evidence from the trial would be used to create new educational programs for law enforcement academies. Nationwide, the curriculum incorporating lessons from both military protocol and FBI investigative techniques, the comprehensive training reflecting the multifaceted career of the officer they had lost. Agent Thompson stood straighter as the judge announced his appointment to lead the Oversight Committee for K-9 reform, his unique combination of FBI experience and personal investment ensuring that implementation of new protocols would be both thorough and meaningful. His daughter's legacy now entrusted to his professional dedication. The Military Honor Guard raised their flags as Judge Richardson detailed how General Thompson's training protocols would be integrated into standard police procedures, her methods for de-escalation and community engagement becoming mandatory nationwide, her military expertise now shaping the future of civilian law enforcement. Officer Sullivan was led away in handcuffs as the judge announced comprehensive psychological screening requirements for all K-9 handlers, the reforms addressing both individual and institutional factors that had contributed to the tragedy, the changes ensuring that power would never again be abused through trained police dogs. Thunder crashed outside as Judge Richardson concluded her sentencing with the establishment of the Thompson Medal for Police Reform, the annual award recognizing officers who exemplify the principles of accountability, transparency, and community service that General Maria Thompson had lived and died defending, her spirit living on through positive change in the system she had served so faithfully until the very end.